On the other side of the coin, cognitive science has told us much about the human brain and mind and where in the brain behavioral and cognitive phenomena happen. Imaging of the brain, especially functional imaging, has become more and more sophisticated and revealing. Brain imaging has revolutionized psychology. No longer is the brain thought of as a black box. So where do we need to go? In my view, it is to integrate neurobiology and cognitive science. How do groups of neurons interact to underlie complex behaviors? This is the province of systems neuroscience. We are just at the beginning of this quest, which must happen if we are truly going to understand the brain. In my view, it is the major challenge for neuroscience in the 21st century. This will be important for understanding not only the normal brain, but also the diseased, damaged, or cognitively compromised brain. Invertebrates have provided some nice examples of understanding simple behaviors neurobiologically, but for complete behaviors in vertebrates, we have far to go. How will this happen? New electron microscope techniques for imaging and reconstructing brain areas down to the single synapse level, recording the activity of hundreds of neurons simultaneously, and computational modeling are all being worked on intensively and are promising in this regard. In this book, I focus on what we do know presently about how the brain functions. As a neurobiologist, I try to emphasize, whenever possible, underlying biological mechanisms for the phenomenon under discussion, in an attempt, wherever possible, to bridge the gap between neurobiology and cognition. Chapter 1 describes the general organization of the brain. What are the cells like that are found in the brain? How do they differ from cells elsewhere in the body? Chapter 2 discusses how brain cells receive, process, and transmit information. Neural signals travel along cells electrically, but between cells chemically. How do cells accomplish this? How do brain cells generate electrical signals? And how do chemical substances pass information to adjacent cells? Chapter 3 discusses in more detail how brain cells talk to one another and the changes that occur in brain cells when they are contacted by other cells. The chemical substances used to communicate signals in the brain are described, and drugs that alter chemical transmission and cause profound alterations in brain function are discussed. Chapter 4 discusses the various sensory receptor systems we have that enable us to experience the world. Chapter 5 describes how invertebrates, animals without backbones, have been invaluable for elucidating neural and behavioral mechanisms. Animals from the sea, such as squids, horseshoe crabs, and sea slugs, have been particularly useful, and examples of important findings from these animals are presented, as well as the role of genetics in uncovering the mechanisms underlying circadian rhythmicity in fruit flies. Chapter 6 describes the architecture of the human brain, the various parts of the brain, and what roles they play. How do the brains of frogs and fishes differ from our brains? Chapters 7 and 8 explore the visual system in depth, from retinal and cortical function to current ideas about visual perception. We know more about the visual system than any other brain system. It provides a wealth of clues about brain function. Chapter 9 deals with development and brain plasticity. How do embryonic brain cells find their way to their targets? How do environment and injury affect the developing and adult brain? The fascinating topics of language, memory, and learning are dealt with in Chapter 10 and 11, along with brain imaging and the question of how we discover new things about the human brain. The neurology clinic has long provided instructive examples of patients with specific brain lesions. Today, brain imaging techniques promise a wealth of new information about the human brain. Chapter 12 turns to matters we associate more with mind, emotions, and rationality. What regions of the brain are involved in emotional behaviors, and what happens when these areas are disrupted? Rationality is an example of an emergent property of the brain, deriving perhaps from emotional behaviors. Finally, Chapter 13 discusses consciousness. What do we mean by